I watched Halloween Ends again. And not on Peacock. No, 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 no. I went to the theater by myself at 4 o'clock in the middle of a Monday. And I watched Halloween Ends again. For you and for me. Because I needed a little more closure on this movie. For all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer. I'm a Halloween YouTuber, not just the movie, but the holiday in general. I'm also Mac Ralston. I'm a storyteller. I'm an author, a writer, whatever you want to call me. And I've done some movies here and there. I am so darn fascinated by Halloween Ends. This may very well be the most fascinating case of a film this year. And I'm not saying it's necessarily good or bad. I'm not going to get into that yet. I will talk about that. But the thought process as to how this movie came to be is extraordinarily fascinating to me. And the reception by fans, critics, casual audiences, the ratings are not good for Halloween Ends, and that's really understandable. I should preface this by saying, if you have not watched my review of Halloween Ends, which I recorded right after seeing it for the first time on opening night, highly recommend you check that out, in addition to my conspiracy theory video on Halloween Ends and or its connections to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Both of those are available very recently on my channel. But my initial thoughts on Halloween Ends were mixed. I appreciated the bold steps that this movie took, but also felt like it was an unsatisfying conclusion to the Halloween franchise. Spoiler alert, it's not going to end here, but okay. To the franchise, but really more specifically this trilogy. And I only have so long to dive into my thoughts in a YouTube review. You know, people have sometimes short attention spans, and I want to make it quick to the point, you know. But here in this podcast, if you're listening to this, this is going to be a deep dive into the world of Halloween Ends and how we got here and what I think about it, what could have been different, my kind of verdict on it now. I mean, opinions change all the time, you know. For example, the Halloween 2018 film, I wasn't a huge fan of when I first saw it. You can actually see my thoughts on that initially in my review here on YouTube. However, the film, to me, has kind of aged like a fine wine. And since I've now regarded it to be a staple of this franchise, of the entire Halloween franchise, and a really great example of how to do a soft reboot / sequel. It's very effective. It brings back the spirit of the original. It updates it a tad for modern audiences. I just really like that movie now. I also am in the minority here. I really loved Halloween Kills. It might be one of my favorite Halloween movies. I know that's unpopular, and I understand 100% the criticisms of that movie. I understand that the dialogue is hokey. That's been a problem kind of throughout this David Gordon Green trilogy. Dead horses were beaten many times over. Hey, do you remember what Michael Myers did 40 years ago? 40 years ago! 40 years ago. 40 years ago. Evil dies tonight. Did you know that Evil's gonna die tonight? Evil dies tonight. He killed people in 1978. Remember that? Wow, in Haddingfield. Yeah, we get it. I know. It's redundant. I know it's silly. But it's unapologetically what it is. It's just Michael Myers going around, stalking and killing people, the town reacting in a crazy way. I think my only real gripe with Halloween Kills, from my personal stance on the movie, despite how much I love it, is Laurie Strode's character gets sidelined in place of other characters like Tommy Doyle, and the town at large, and kind of the chaos that ensues. But that's okay, because she gets more time to shine in both Halloween and Halloween Ends. And that brings us to the present. Actually, it doesn't, because I have a few more things I want to say. I want to talk about my personal stance on this franchise and kind of some of my favorite and least favorites of the series, just so you can get a feel for where I'm coming from here. I'm going to be 24 in just a matter of days at the recording of this. I don't know when I'm going to upload this just yet, but... So I'm a 24-year-old guy, been in the horror movies since probably 2012-ish. So, a good 10 years now. 10-year horror fan. And because of that, I have never seen a Halloween movie in theaters until this new trilogy. I was too young for the Rob Zombie ones, and before that, they're all before my time, really. I don't know when Resurrection, I think Resurrection was the early 2000s, but again, I was a baby. I'm pretty sure my parents weren't going to take me to see Halloween Resurrection, and that's a good thing because that movie is terrible. But I say that to say, this is like my theatrical Halloween experience, this trilogy. Good, bad. This is the Halloween trilogy that will be my theatrical experience for a while until there's inevitably another Michael Myers movie. And I'm a nostalgic person, so I have some kind of, I don't know, that's kind of a special thing for me. Even if there are bad, horribly written parts in some of these movies, it's a special experience to say, in the future I can be like, I was there. I was there to see Halloween Ends, to see how it ends, quote unquote, even though we know it's not going to be the end. To me, there's something special about that. And I have a long history with this franchise. Love the original Halloween, one of the best horror movies, and the best slasher ever made. Halloween 2 is, I don't know if it's equally as awesome, but it's sure close. It's a really good movie. I think I actually saw Halloween 2 before I saw Halloween, which sounds like horror movie blasphemy, but that's how the dice rolled. Halloween 3 is one of my favorites of the entire franchise, and one of my favorite Halloween movies. Not the franchise, but the holiday. I just have to watch it every Halloween now. Halloween 4 is among my favorites as well. 5 and 6 take kind of a dip for me. H2O gets a little bit better. The style is a bit off, doesn't quite feel like a Halloween movie, feels like something akin to Scream, but I enjoy it overall. I like the characters and Laurie Strode. That's probably the closest thing to the 2018 movie is H2O. Resurrection might be my least favorite. Doesn't have a good vibe going for it. I don't remember anything about the characters. It's almost so bad that it's good, and I like those kinds of movies. So, entertainment-wise, it gets some brownie points, but overall it's just not a good movie. I have yet to finish Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, which I need to do that, and I will, because I've heard some comparisons between Halloween Ends and Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's, but his first outing is a mixed bag for me. I like when he deviates from the original, because it's different. It doesn't feel like Michael Myers, though, because he talks and, he's got a tragic backstory, but I like Rob Zombie's take on the character, do something different with it. When he tries to remake the original is, to me, where that movie falters, because you can't really recreate that magic. And that brings us to now, this David Gordon Green trilogy, and the reception that Halloween Ends has had with both critics and audiences. The movie currently holds a solid 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 5 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 45% on Metacritic. So it is below average on basically every review site across the board. I have heard people say it is the least good Halloween movie of them all. I have heard some people compare it to the original. I am not in either camp. I don't think it's the worst Halloween. It's a far cry from the best Halloween. I don't know where I would rank it, in fact, because it doesn't really feel like a Halloween movie to me. And that brings me to this second viewing of the film. I saw the opening night premiere of Halloween Ends, I had an expectation when I went in. The trailers promised me this epic conclusion to this trilogy that I enjoyed. I really liked kills. I really liked Halloween. I was excited to see where they would go. I just watched them in preparation for it. The trailers showed Laurie kicking Michael's butt, Michael fighting back, you know, the classic image that you would expect with, especially this trilogy. They've placed a big emphasis on Laurie's character here and her family subsequently. And apparently there were plot leaks online that the deep fans knew about. I didn't want to read into that stuff. I just wanted to go in blind and experience it. And maybe that wasn't for the best. And I feel like that's what a lot of audiences are going to take away, is they weren't going to expect what was about to happen. Specifically because of this new character that's introduced at the beginning of the film, a babysitter by the name of Corey Cunningham. And it is this character and his inclusion with the plot that is the controversial new element of this. And I had this problem with Rise of Skywalker. Now, I'm using the Star Wars comparison here because I really didn't care for that new Star Wars trilogy all that much. I should say I'm not the biggest diehard Star Wars fan. I'm a horror movie guy. I'm not a, fantastical fantasy science fiction type person. I like horror. Sci-fi horror, but horror. But I digress. I say that to say that I really feel like they dropped the ball in not planning their trilogy out and winging it and failing miserably and adding a bunch of new crap into Rise of Skywalker. And in a way, I can understand why fans may feel the same about the Halloween trilogy. Because from what I've heard, David Gordon Green and Danny McBride pitched the first Halloween from 2018 and decided upon its success to continue the trilogy. First of all, can we not act blind? Everybody knew, just like with Star Wars more, but still, they knew that this was going to be successful. It's the nostalgia bait trick. That's why we get so many remakes, sequels, reboots, requels, whatever. Because the IP, the intellectual property of this franchise, draws in fans. Even if they think it's going to be bad, they need to see how bad is it going to be, And eventually there's a drop-off where you just don't care anymore. I've had that happen with a few. I don't really care about the Star Wars movies anymore. Don't care about Transformers. And also I should say I'm not a huge fan of any of those franchises to begin with. But with something like Halloween, you're going to capture the horror fans because we love this franchise. We love Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, the struggle in Haddonfield, and to see where this all winds up. And so, I don't know why they didn't assume that Halloween was going to make a butt-ton amount of money, which it did, and of course that means they greenlit sequels. And it seems like that perhaps those sequels were not planned, because really when you look back at this trilogy, the 2018 movie probably should have just stood on its own, in the same way that the original should have stood on its own. But okay, we like the original, we want something new with Michael Myers. Let's say it's 40 years later, he breaks back out, wreaks havoc, Laurie takes her revenge, bada bing, bada boom, done. When the sequels come into play, that's where these elements get added in. And you can see from the beginning, I kind of touched on this in my conspiracy video, but you can see from the beginning, they wanted to add some different things into this mix. For example, the Doctor in Halloween 2018 stabs the police chief guy and tries to become Michael Myers, only for Michael to kill him. This was a controversial part of that movie, and it is the first inkling of what was to come with Halloween Ends. In Halloween Kills, we got a little bit more. We got the mob inclusion and kind of the subplot of the mob chasing after this escaped inmate and him jumping from the hospital, taking a side quest, I guess, taking a side story progression away from Michael Myers. Because you notice the pacing in Halloween in Halloween Kills is a bit weird. Because as soon as Michael gets to the Myers house, where he kills Big John and Little John, he's pretty much just chilling there until the final act of the movie. So there's a weird pacing issue there, and it's structured around this mob thing. And that's probably where some of the criticism of that movie comes from. I thought it was a neat inclusion. It didn't take too much away from the focus. It was just kind of a neat side thing, so I got it. Here, in Halloween Ends, this new character, Corey Cunningham, and his progression take center stage. And it is here where we find the issues that people are bringing up, rightfully so, with Halloween Ends. Halloween Ends is not really a Halloween movie. It is an anthology movie. It is a Halloween, the holiday, anthology movie. Similarly to its predecessor, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And in my conspiracy video, I talked about the ties with the font and the choices that were made throughout the trilogy to address perhaps that Halloween Ends was going to be a bit different. And I say a bit lightly, because this movie is totally different than any other Halloween movie, good or bad, however you want to interpret that. Some people have praised it for being different, some people say it goes too far. I am in the middle. I like new elements in the Halloween franchise, but I think it should stick to what it's good at and what the fans expect. And that is the name of the game here. Expectation. The trailers indicated this final chapter with very little mention of this Corey Cunningham character and plotline, which takes basically the first two acts and half of the third act, of this movie. A big chunk of it. It's arguably the Corey Cunningham movie, not really a Halloween movie. It also doesn't feel very Halloween-y. There are, of course, musical selections that are Halloween-y, some decorations here and there, but on the whole idea of trick-or-treaters and Michael Myers walking through them at night with the do-do-do-do-do-do classic music, not really present in this movie. And it's here when this movie is setting up that it's the finale of this trilogy. The finale of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. That fans probably went in, I know so because I'm one of them, fans went in expecting to get more of that. And they didn't. We didn't. And because of that, we got pissed. And again, understandably so. It was not a satisfying conclusion to this trilogy. It didn't wrap up certain character arcs and character journeys. We didn't really get a resolution of Laurie and Allison on Laurie's daughter, Allison's mother, being killed. We didn't really get anything with the romance between the sheriff and Laurie, or Allison and why she suddenly is like on a dime, ready to fall head over heels for this guy when she was kind of like a tomboyish character in the other two. At least that's what I took it as. Very headstrong type of woman. We never really got anything about what's her name? The little girl that the housewife's girl. Why is it Lindsay Wallace? There was like barely any Lindsay Wallace or anything to do with her character. There were so many things left unspoken for, and I feel like all of that combined with the addition of this new character caused fans to revolt and say that this movie was terrible, and I can't blame them one iota. Had this Corey Cunningham plot thread been perhaps through this entire trilogy, maybe he was introduced along with some more of Allison's friends or something in the first movie. In the second one, maybe the babysitting accident happens, and in this third one, this whole idea of the evil transferring from Michael to him happens. Maybe that would have been a little more forgivable, but he's introduced right at the beginning of this one, and the whole thing's about him. I also think that it could have been more forgivable had this been the second of the movies. Because the finale needs to go back to the beginning, needs to go to the core of why we're watching Laurie and Michael's feud. That's what fans wanted to see. And did we get it? Yeah, technically, for about 5 minutes at the end of the movie. In a kitchen. For 5 minutes. Was it cool? Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty brutal. It was pretty dope. You know, it's nice to have a nice send-off for Jamie Lee Curtis after her 40-plus years of being a part of this franchise. But still, it just seemed a little bit wrong. Very wrong. To have a Halloween movie with barely any Michael Myers in it. Because here's the thing. And I find this kind of funny. Maybe some people can relate to me here. But Halloween, people say, oh, you know, it's about, you know, evil. And Michael Myers with the white mask, you can project your fears onto him. He represents all evil. And Laurie is like the survivor woman who survived the evil, and it comes back to haunt her. She has trauma and PTSD and all this stuff. And all that's true. I agree with all of that. However, let's remember that the original Halloween and most of this franchise, including these new movies, are mostly about a guy in a white mask stalking and stabbing people. That's what this franchise is at its core. Okay? I don't think the first one was attempting to be this deep philosophical film. It's turned into that, and I think there's more that you can take away from it. That's because John Carpenter and Deborah Hill knew what they were doing when they made a good movie. A classic in so many regards. However, that movie was originally just going to be called The Babysitter Murders and was just to have a slasher movie because they would make money. So I kind of have that cynical look at things as well as being reverent of how important Halloween is in the horror world. Basically what I'm saying is it's not that deep. It's not that headspacey. It's Michael Myers in a mask on Halloween. That's what people want to see. And when you take that away, even if the idea of the story is good, people are going to get mad. And that's what this movie did. And that leads me to this second viewing. Because the first time, I was a Halloween fanboy, you could say. I wanted to see this concluding chapter end on a satisfying high, and it didn't. I was bummed. I was mad. But this second viewing, I changed my perspective. Instead of going to see the movie that I wanted to see, I went in trying to watch the movie that the filmmakers wanted to show me. I flipped the perspective around. So I went in with a new lens. I went in wanting to understand this character of Corey Cunningham, wanting to understand the threads that they were trying to add into or conclude in Halloween Ends. And overall, the experience was a lot more satisfying. Now, this of course begs the question, is the movie good? I don't know. I can't fully answer that. I would say that as a horror movie, it's fine. But as a Halloween movie, it still fundamentally is flawed. Had it been a different movie altogether, I feel like it would have been a lot more popular, yet at the same time it wouldn't have the Halloween name to rely on. So I feel like that is an indicator of perhaps the mindset of this movie. However, it does carry themes from this franchise. It still carries the characters. It still does have Michael Myers. It's not like Halloween 3 that doesn't have any. And perhaps that's why people got so PO'd. Because he was in the movie, but just not that much. And he was degraded when he was in it. He was weak. He was bumbling. Didn't have his mask sometimes. People want to see Michael Myers be a threat, as he was in 2018 in Halloween Kills. Even if you don't like those movies, they at least got that Michael Myers is a sinister, spooky, serial killer guy. However, I went into the movie on this second viewing and just watched it for what it was. And what the movie really is an understanding of the idea of evil being transferred from one individual into another. We see this alluded to multiple times throughout the movie. There is a band geek bully that bullies Corey Cunningham. His father is abusive, and there's some line thrown around to the effect of it's contagious. That the evil from the father is contagious, and the sins of him pass along to his son, making him want to lash out. In the same way, Corey Cunningham, because of the evil of Michael Myers, when he looks into those eyes, the devil's eyes, as Dr. Loomis would say, the evil transfers from Michael into Corey. Corey also saw a very traumatic experience during this babysitter gig, and I'm assuming because of that, the town marked him, labeled him as this monster, even though that wasn't the case, and because of that, they treated him with hostility, and that negativity was poured into this guy. And because of that, when you pour negativity in, negativity comes out. Something true. Something I feel like that's accurate to life. We see this a lot. We see this even with actual serial killers. Bad things get poured into them. They're abused. They don't have a lot of friends. People make fun of them. They're bullied. They snap. And they hurt people. We see this all the time. So it is a topical story. It's relevant. It may even be important. However, it's not quite Halloween. And that's really where people get hung up. However, Halloween is incorporated in the sense of we still don't know where Michael's evil came from. He just perhaps always was evil. And his evil from the events of the other two movies, I'm trying to tie this back into the trilogy, his rampage from the other two movies has caused this evil to spread. People, we see a montage where there's a woman hanging from her house, someone uses a gun to kill someone else, and the sheriff says something to the effect of Michael doesn't use guns. Kind of showing how the evil has spread from one individual into a community setting, and Corey Cunningham is simply an individual result of that, I suppose. Now, there are flaws with this. Quite a few. A lot in the dialogue department and the wordiness department. And this has been a gripe from the get-go of this trilogy. And one of the reasons that I think that's true for Halloween Ends is because there are 4 writers. Now look, I understand the virtue of having multiple writers. You can check one another's work, so to speak. You can have different ideas thrown around. However, the more writers there are, the more that the story is pulled in multiple directions, because different brains have different ideas and different ways of telling a story. That's understandable. However, it causes the story to be split in a lot of different directions, and some of which may not work. That's kind of what happened here, especially when it comes to the dialogue and how things are structured. I think the first reason that this Halloween movie feels different and also kind of rushed, maybe is a word, because it just has this feeling to it, are the voiceovers from Jamie Lee Curtis, from Laurie Strode. These are throughout this entire trilogy, but they're really prevalent in Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. There are these very long-winded, very metaphorical, deep, poetic, wordy, blah, 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 purple prose, if you will. Some of it might even be nonsense. These long ramblings of Laurie Strode saying something about evil, the nature of evil. And it just kind of goes on and on and on. And it really is pugnant here, because in the context of the story, Laurie Strode is writing a book about her experiences with Michael Myers, okay? But there are these long-winded scenes of her going, and evil transfers, it changes shape. I like that line, but there are so many cases where not just the voiceover work, but just the characters speak in ways that normal people wouldn't talk in. They talk way too much like Dr. Loomis, which I love his character. Everybody loves Dr. Loomis, but he's just one character, and it seems like in this trilogy, mostly, again, Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, despite how much I like Kills, it seems like the characters talk too much like him. They are too wordy and too verbose. And it also seems like this town is so bent on Michael Myers, when I thought in the first movie they did a good job of explaining that it's not that big of a deal. Is it terrible that 5 people were murdered? Oh, absolutely. That's so sad. However, as the character in the first Halloween, the 2018 one, mentioned, there are far worse things that happen every day. I mean, now we have stabbings and shootings and cars being driven through parades or whatever, like terrible things in the world. So 5 people being stabbed in 1978, I mean, is it really, like, gonna cause a community to panic now? After the events of Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, sure, that's a huge loss of life, especially from one individual. But considering that the whole town is familiar about 1978, seems like they're like a part of the fact. They're in the know that they're in a Halloween movie is what I'm trying to say. They like know, oh, that Halloween original movie is like a classic. We need to have more reverence for something that most people would not think about every day. But this whole community is bent on Michael Myers. So you have that. You also have some weird editing and writing choices throughout the movie. There's a couple examples, but one such example is a scene where Corey Cunningham and Allison are going on a walk, and this is right after Corey kills a homeless man, and he says, "I killed somebody." Allison stops, he approaches her, holds out his hand, and Allison, like, takes it. And then we cut to the next scene. I'm like, what? That's it? Like, he just admitted to you that he murdered someone and you don't care? And either that's a really poor part on the screenwriter, or there was a conversation there and it was cut in editing. It went on the chopping block for some reason. There's a few other instances of this where characters are talking, and it seems like they're not even talking about the same thing, or the conversation moves way too quickly. Like, Laurie is talking to Corey. Yeah, I know, the names rhyme. Corey Cunningham wakes up on the ground, and Laurie Strode says something like, "Don't be with Allison," and then he's immediately like, "You wish you saw him, Michael. You should have looked in his eyes." I'm like, where did this come from? Is this just turning into a monologue? It feels out of place. And it's some of those sloppy instances that solidify why people think this movie is cheesy. And I guess the same can be said for Halloween Kills. Now, I understood the virtue of the story and the originality of it. It does feel very much like Christine, the John Carpenter Stephen King crossover. Even the name of the main character in Christine, Arnie Cunningham, is referred to by the name of Corey Cunningham. But despite that original story in a Halloween movie, there are these instances throughout it that make you second guess yourself. There are some nice callbacks throughout the movie. There is a line that Nick Castle, who makes a cameo, he says a line referring to the original movie, "See anything you like." At the end, we get shots of Laurie's house, and it's very calm, similar, or I guess paralleling the original Halloween, where you hear Michael's breathing throughout the house. All of that was nice stuff. But a big chunk of this movie could have really been altered. Could have been changed. Maybe just taken out entirely and substituted for something else. Now, I guess the question remains, where do they go from here? David Gordon Green and company, I'm assuming, are done with this franchise. They're moving on to The Exorcist for next year. But what about the fans? What happens to us wanting more Michael Myers? Inevitably, considering the box office money that the Halloween movies have made, each of them making like hundreds of millions of dollars. This one, Halloween Ends, has already made like $50 million on a $20 million budget, so it's made back its budget almost twofold. So it's inevitable more Michael Myers will be down the road. What do they do? Because he is ground up by the end of this movie, so you can't continue this story. In fact, Jamie Lee Curtis said she won't be returning for any more, so you can't really follow Laurie at all. So, do you do another reboot, sequel, requel thing where you have it 50 years later? Or Michael breaks out again and he's an old man? I don't know. My best idea is, and again, this is because I liked the sequences in Halloween Kills, but I really enjoyed the flashbacks to the 70s taking place on the same night. I would love to see, because I as much as I love Halloween 2, the whole thing about Laurie being Michael's sister, I feel like just complicates things more than it needs to be. Michael just picks people to stalk, and he happened to pick this girl, Laurie Strode. Nothing to do with them being related, it just is, he's a creep. Something that would be interesting is a movie entirely set on that same Halloween night. After Michael gets shot off the balcony, Dr. Loomis looks over the ledge and he's gone. We see a continuation of that night. Where does he go? Who does he meet? Another story told about where Michael goes. Or maybe Halloween 1979. You know, shoot it in the style of the original. Because I thought those sequences in Halloween Kills looked really great whenever they did flashbacks to 1978. But have it set in that time. Don't make it about Laurie Strode. Make it about a new character or characters. Have Michael stalking them and he does what he does. In my opinion, tone down on the gory stuff. I appreciate the practical effects, but Halloween was never really about the gore, that original, especially. It's about the stalking and the creeping and barely seeing Michael. In this David Gordon Green trilogy, he feels more like Jason. And I like Friday the 13th, don't get me wrong, but it's a different style of character. And that through line isn't quite met. And I would have liked if he was a little more stalkery and less brute force type of guy. There are some neat kills in Ends, specifically with the disc jockey character, but again, it feels more like Friday the 13th. So tone back on the gore, add more stalking, don't get into the reasons as to why he's evil or, you know, all this deep stuff. Just tell a good story on Halloween night of Michael Myers stalking people and how the kids or adults or whomever it might be fight back. To me, I think that would make a really compelling story. But I guess, ultimately, that's going to be a question for the fans. Are you ready for more Halloween? How long should they take before releasing a new Halloween movie? 5 years? 10 years? Would you want one next year? Would you want one never? 50 years? Let me know in the comments below. I know this podcast has been a bit ranty or rambling. We're jumping all over the place in the Halloween franchise. But ultimately, my final sum up after seeing Halloween Ends again in theaters was when I changed my perspective. The movie had a lot more virtue than I first thought it would have. Is it a good Halloween movie? Not really. Barely any Michael. Kind of a weak ending to this trilogy and to the franchise. And a weird plot line for what should have been a simple finale to the trilogy. However, as its own movie, on its own, it has some interesting, compelling themes that me, as kind of a film nerd, someone who likes to critique movies and really dive into the meanings and stuff, I found fascinating. So that might just be me, but the response seems largely like, I'd say 70% hate it, 30% like it, and those 30% aren't like it's my favorite Halloween, they just enjoyed the movie. So overall, it's not getting a good reception. If you're someone who hated it, I would maybe ask you to see it again. I know you might not want to. Maybe you just really hated this entire trilogy. I don't know. But I would say give it another shot with a different perspective. Don't go into it expecting Michael Myers. Go into it expecting to see this character, Corey Cunningham, and his development. Is that what you want to see? No, we want to see Myers, we want to see Laurie Strode, but give him a shot. Don't think he's terrible. Also, I'll throw this out there, too, because we get hints about the supernatural progression of the story. Would you want to see a movie where Corey Cunningham becomes the killer in a supernatural way? Because Myers is completely destroyed, but Corey Cunningham, from what we know, isn't. What do you think? Personally, I don't know how I feel about that copycat thing. I feel like it's a one-and-done story. Bring it back to Myers, or just don't bring it back at all. But what do you think? Drop a comment below. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure to subscribe if you love Halloween. And remember, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.